Tonight I'm excited to welcome Greg Sarris, celebrating the release of his new work of fiction, The Forgetters. The Forgetters is a collection that begins with a pair of crows sat in a corner of Sonoma Mountain in Northern California. The crows are named Question Woman and Answer Woman. Answer Woman knows all the stories, but can only tell them if asked by Question Woman, who can't remember any story. Drawing on Native American folklore, these resonant palm-of-the-hand stories bridge past, present, and future. Through tales like A Man Follows an Osprey and A Woman Meets an Owl, a Rattlesnake, and a Hummingbird in Santa Rosa, we meet the Forgetters. They are members of the southern Pomo and coast Miwok tribes and the settlers around them who have become estranged from the land, community, and customs that could sustain them. In the course of each story, these men and women manage to transform and become something more. These are stories which all of us, natives and settlers alike, can learn from. Greg Sarris is an author who lives in Sonoma County, California. He is serving his first term as a board member for the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. His books include Grand Avenue, which in 1996 became an HBO miniseries, the novel Watermelon Nights, and Becoming Story, which is a memoir and essays that explores how California has been changed by European conquest and the suppression of indigenous ways of life. He is currently serving his 16th term as chairman of the Federated Indians of Graton Rancheria. He'll be in conversation with Tanya Thrasher, a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. A graduate of George Washington University, she is the publications manager at the National Museum of the American Indian. She also serves as editor-in-chief of the museum's quarterly magazine, American Indian. So now, please join me in giving a big Union Market welcome to Greg Sarris and Tanya Thrasher.
Thanks so much for coming out.
Yeah. It's good to see you.
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for being with us. And I'm excited to be chatting with...
I don't think we need the mics.
Yeah, I'm okay. Oh, for the audio recording? Okay.
Oh.
Great. All right. Well, I'm excited to be speaking with Chairman Sarris again and to welcome you into our conversation tonight about the Forgetters. And in fact, Chairman Sarris and I met for the first time about 2 years ago at a Politics and Prose bookstore, the other location. And since then, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what you've done. You've added to your impressive multi-hyphenate career quite a bit. You've served as a co-executive producer of a film on Joan Baez. You've debuted a play in San Francisco. You've published The Forgetters. You've been appointed to the University of California Board of Regents, and you've started your first term as the chair of the board at our museum, the National Museum of the American Indian. All of this in addition to your role as a professor and tribal chairman. So in fact, Chairman Sarris and I both came today from the museum. At the museum, we're celebrating the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which we're hosting, and the theme is the Indigenous Voices of the Americas, which I think is very appropriate for this evening. And you've written for our museum before on the topic of storytelling. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about and ask you, how has storytelling shaped your identity and how has it influenced your life?
Oh, well, a good question. First of all, I think, Tanya, that stories are how we know one another or how we can even begin to reflect on who we are. And as I've often told people, I didn't read a book till 11th grade. I was on the streets and running around. And the great irony is that I only started studying so that I would not be poor all my life and, be a businessman and get rich and get back at all the people that made me work hard and do all the crap that I did. But then, of course, I fell in love with stories because, the hardest thing when you start studying and you're away from your friends and family and you're alone, and my family was poor, in a corner room with a light bulb, it is lonely. It's lonely because you're not familiar yet with reading or the joys of reading that come or any of those things. And so I would sit there and it was so lonely. But then I started reading. I remember the first book I read was The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. And I remember feeling sorry for the fish. And I thought, inauspicious beginnings for an English professor. But in any event, the stories literature started keeping me company, and it reminded me of what I'd heard on the streets, the old folks telling stories and all of that. And I remember then when I finally got to UCLA as an undergraduate, we were reading Faulkner, and all the other kids young people in my class were saying things like, "Oh God, he's awful, the sentences just go on and on and on." I said, "That's just an old drunk guy on the front porch going on and on. And have you ever been around a storyteller, old drunk guy on the porch that just talks on and on and on?" I understood it very well. So, but it kept me company, and stories are essential. Tanya, it's the only thing we have. It's how we know what we are. We don't have great wings to fly high. We don't have strong legs or arms, and as a lot of the animals, but we have language and stories. And language is how we know ourselves, and language has incredible power. Stories killed 6 million Jews. Its stories are creating wars and race relations and homophobia and transphobia. All these things are stories, right? But stories can also heal. They can do the opposite. And our job, I think, or I feel, is to use stories as medicine, the doctor.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about why storytelling is so important to Native communities.
Well, Native communities, again, that's all we had. The stories reminded us of not only who we were as a people, but how to live as a people with the land. And it's interesting because the landscape was like our Bible. It was our sacred text. So features of the landscape all had stories associated with them. So like an outcropping of rocks or a creek or a spring somewhere was associated with certain stories, and you knew who you were and knew how you were reminded that's of certain, not only of the place and how you were located in the place, but morals and other kinds of ideas about how to live sustainably with the place. And what happened with colonization, remember, is they not only decimated our cultures and people in so many ways, but they decimated the landscape so that it became unrecognizable. And that was comparable to burning our sacred text. And what was left was just pieces of the land. People all hear about the golden hills of California. There were never any golden hills of California. That's all European oatgrass that came up there and dried out all the land, lowered the water table 50 feet everywhere in California, and overnight, like within 20 years, changed the landscape. So just in terms of the grasses, it became unrecognizable. So what do we do? What we're left with are pieces of stories. And we have to restory the landscape, restory ourselves. And so once again, that stories become something good. And by the way, folks, today, with AI and all of that sort of thing coming on, more than ever, we're going to have to make sure we have good stories that are actually generated from the human soul and heart. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that phrase, restory the landscape.
Yeah.
I love it. And in fact, the title of your work, The Forgetters, struck me immediately, and it really gave me pause. I wanted to know who and what the forgetters were, and it was both evocative and like a little unsettling, which I found really intriguing. And I really wanted to know more about the chattering crows. So for me, the banter between answer woman and question woman really helped to guide and reorient me as a reader. And can you talk a little bit about sort of your intention with the animal narrators?
Tanya just asked me 27 questions in one.
I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
no, it's perfect. That's fine.
I can break it
Remember,
down.
you got to be careful. You got to be careful. I'm a professor. You give me a chance, I'll talk forever. Or as my family says, "Oh God, here comes cousin professor. Be careful. Everything you say is going to end up in a book." Well, first of all, I think that the forgetters are all of us. And one of the things we have to realize and remember that we're all here now. We can no longer, my mother was white. My dad was Indian or American Indian. And, my Indian side of the family always says, oh, your father's downfall was white women and all of this kind of stuff. Well, we can't do that anymore, especially when you think of the climate crisis and all the stuff that we're bickering about, the debate tonight, which is going on, all that stuff is actually going to look, I hate to say this, like a tea party in a hailstorm with the climate crisis that's approaching. And the climate crisis that's approaching is going to be the great leveler to show that we are all, in fact, equal. Now, rich people can run to the highest mountain when the waters come up or do whatever, but nobody's going to escape that. The sun, the stars, the moon, the water, none of that discriminates and or separates. And it's us who do that. And I think, once again, the forgetters are people who forgot these things, left the sacred mountain, as the story goes, and are all of us now down here, Indian, non-Indian. As you know, in the book, there's all different races of folks. And again, race is ultimately a pretty artificial and arbitrary creation that, as we live, we're going to have to, as sexual orientation and everything else is. So we're going to have to get past those classifications. But there's that. And then regarding the Crow sisters, who are the storytellers, they're two sisters, twin sisters, that as in ancient times and in modern times could either be crows or twin human sisters. They're shapeshifters. They can be either one. And so in our tribe, we have people that would turn into human bears, and we had shapeshifters and people who could do that. And, the funny thing is they always say the more spirits you are, the better you are, the more interesting you are. So anyway, but they're two sisters who are independent or dependent on one another. One can't remember the stories unless she's asked, and the one that's asking can never remember. So they need one another to, that's the theme of the book, that we need one another. But at the same time, I wanted to use them to recreate the oral experience. In the old days, the storyteller would sit up on something higher like this, and the people would sit in the dark, and the storyteller would imitate the voices of the animals in the stories. And of course, the kids and people would imagine that. And so I wanted to kind of, again, textualize that sense of the oral experience. I also wanted to make it conversational. Like when you're sitting around the table at home and people tell stories, or with your friends and go, oh, that reminds me of this, or that reminds me of that. And you start telling stories. So I wanted, so much of what we're doing with oral traditions is textualizing the oral traditions as writers, as as Indigenous writers. So, yeah. Did I kind of answer all those questions?
Thanks.
I hope.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you delving a little bit into the animal narrators. And in fact, their conversation takes place over the arc of a single day, which I found really compelling. So can you talk a little bit about how your approach, and you've talked a little bit already about it, your distinct approach to telling Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok, specifically creation stories through both human and animal characters, the use of both?
Well, yeah, because it was pretty much in our culture. There was a time before this one. Our ideological culture. I mean, the story of creation is complete opposite of the Judeo-Christian, because Judeo-Christian, there's God up here, and then man, and then woman, and then all the way down to the beast, right? The great chain of being, and everything was created for man and for humans. But for us, it's just the opposite. So there was the time before this one when all the animals were people. They were all people getting along, living in the village up there on the mountain. And then one of the people got greedy and tried to kill, in this case, Deer Woman. And she grew legs and ran away. And the other animals who were people thought, oh my God, this person's dangerous. And they grew wings and flew away. The dumb person, the greedy one, is the one that was left. And that's our ancestor. And our job then is to reconnect in life with all of the animals that we separated ourselves from. And all of those things, that's power, the complete antithesis of the Judeo-Christian understanding of a relationship with the world. We have therefore we strive to reconnect, not to disconnect, which is a very kind of, and as the old people said, the day would come, in fact, I spoke about this just at this Smithsonian, at the museum. The old people, I remember as being a young boy, our great prophet, who was a woman at the time, she said, all you young people are leaving your traditions, leaving the things we're teaching around like clothes on the ground. And she said, you need to pick them up and remember, because the day's going to come when the non-Indians are going to come back to us and say, how do we live here? We made a mistake. Imagine the Spanish missionaries who came and missionized us. They had no sense that we were doing controlled burning to control the landscape. They thought we were burning everything so that their cattle and horses couldn't eat, so that it was as if it were an act of war, and they forbid the controlled burning. They were also so small-minded that, of course, they were punishing homosexuality and all of that sort of thing. And their stories, they kept good records, and this story is really kind of remarkable. Down in the Santa Clara Mission, one of the padres saw two guys go into a hut, and they didn't come out for a couple hours, and he went in there, and they were in there making love, and the punishment was that if you broke the rules, you got hung by your fingers. And they took the guys out and hung them by their fingers, and the one who could speak Spanish said, but he's my mate. I mean, we believe you got punished if you're cheating or stealing somebody's mate or something like that. And he was trying to explain in Spanish that I didn't do anything wrong. And ironically, this is how, again, people seeing through their own lens there's lessons in learning about our history, different histories and cultures. But the same padre, the next day or maybe a week later, he was watching the women bathe in the Santa Clara River. What was he doing watching them bathe? Number one. Number two, he saw one come out with male genitalia, and he interpreted that person who had been dressing as a female as a male who had been dressing as a female, so that, I'll say she, could look at the women naked. That's how, again, so, all of us have a tendency to look at things, Tanya, through our own lenses, but the wonderful opportunity to engage with other cultures and points of view is to learn something about the limits of our own vision. And certainly, I think the day has come when more than ever, we're going to need to do that.
Thank you. You've addressed it, but I was really carried along by the purposeful jumps back and forth throughout history that you introduce, and how you introduce a variety of characters from Native California and how they interact. So, and you talked a little bit just now about lessons, and I found that sort of the lesson and theme of remembrance is really put on full display in The Forgetters, and I found that to a call to action, just like you were talking about. And may I ask, what are other lessons that you hope that we take away? You've addressed certainly the call to action in terms of not only understanding cross-culturally, but the world and the earth.
Well, I think that's the answer. The understanding cross-cultural is one thing. But, I mean, some of the lessons here are reminders that we're not the center of the universe, we're just part of it. And every time we think we're the center or attempt to control something, notice it usually comes back on us or doesn't last very long. So, and it's so funny, we keep forgetting that lesson, don't we? We keep, I mean, if you look at kind of what's going on today, we've forgotten certain things that were historical and we didn't learn, we forget. So in that case, memory is so important, like don't forget, as a professor, having been a professor for quite a few years, it was pretty amazing to see how many of my students didn't have any sense of the 60s or 70s or things like that.
Right.
You know, I
I
mentioned
know.
something about Joan Baez, and of course, none of them knew who she was. And of course, she was in that day bigger than Beyonce or Taylor Swift or anything in the 60s, right? An icon. So I kind of said, well, you do know who Bob Dylan was or is, right? And one student raised her hand, and she said, and I said, yes. And she said, wasn't he one of the Beatles? I said, no, not exactly. So,
Not quite.
yeah.
I was also struck by how you gave us distinct perspectives of both flawed and endearing human characters, like Calupus
Yeah.
and Marlene, the Chilean man, and how you turn places like Sonoma Mountain or even a giant sturgeon fish into really vibrant characters. So can you talk a little bit about how your home in California and your tribal homelands inspire your writing and your character development?
Well, the landscape and the stories, and certainly the stories that my elders told me, have had a huge influence. But then I make them up and stuff like that. But regarding the characters being flawed, can you imagine somebody who wasn't flawed?
I know.
Find that person for
Impossible.
me. And I don't want to meet him, her, or them. I just don't. Because they're boring. It's like a piece of paper. We're flawed. That's what our scars make. Scars make your body more interesting. Flaws make you. That's how we're human.
Absolutely.
I mean, Shakespeare, all the great writers played on our flaws. And and all the stories in the Bible or indigenous stories such as my own, they all start with flawed characters or people making mistakes. And they're told to remind us, don't do that again, or just be mindful as you go forward. So again, all of the things are potentially, we have great potential for good and we have great potential for bad. And hopefully we'll lean more to the side that promotes life and sustainability. That is, if we don't forget. You know, things like greed, things like quests for power, all of those things are very blinding because you get very single-minded. And once you're single-minded, you lose vision of what you don't need or want for your own purposes. And that's dangerous.
Very true. Very true. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'd like to shift a little bit
Okay.
about to your process of writing, which interests me quite a bit as a writer myself. And given your incredibly busy schedule, I just talked about what you've done in just the past 2 years, which is incredible. And given all the commitments that you have and the responsibilities you have, how do you focus on your writing? Like what time of day? How do you fit it in? How do you approach it?
Well, any chance I get is the flippant answer I would give you, Tanya.
That's fair.
But no, one of the things is I dream a lot. So and that's part being so busy, and also being when the casino there got big, and that we've done so much. We've given just in the last 10 years. $85 million to charity, to causes for social justice and environmental stewardship. We just worked with Jane Fonda, gave her $5 million and defeated the oil companies that were wanting to drill in neighborhoods. News just came out yesterday, which was good. And $240 million to the local communities there for infrastructure and stuff. So you kind of become somebody who people know, and then of course, when they think you have money, they come up and everybody's your best friend. They hated, the community was totally against the casino before it was built. Now they'd have you believe they discovered it. But that's, you take the high road always. But so it's kind of hard when people know you, because I'm a dreamer. So when I go shopping or go to the gym or something, I'm always thinking of the stories, or driving. I'm always kind of thinking, well, what about this? And what about that? And of course, at the gym, they probably think I'm the biggest desperate I was going to say whore, but the most desperate person in town, because I would always run up to the desk and go, do you have a piece of paper? Do you have a pen? And they think I'm writing down my number or something and giving it out in there. And I'm, making notes on something that I was that I was thinking about. So Or they, I don't know why one of them didn't say, just use your cell phone, dude, or you're that old, you can't just, that's what the younger folks do. But,
That's great.
yeah.
While you're writing, do you share with others? You're in process writing.
Yeah, so insecure. We're always so insecure. So I have about 2 or 3 friends I'll call up, and I start with the one that, I could, write, a donkey fell out of the sky, and he'd say, oh, that's just so deep, that's so wonderful. So I start with him, and then I go down to the third one, which is pretty critical. So I'll read it over the phone. Do you have a minute and all of that? And the third one, who's really critical, I remember saying to him, just one more minute, please, because it was lousy what I was writing. And just one more minute. And he said to me, one more minute, and I'm not looking forward to it. So, I do. I read it over the phone and then look at it, and, so it's a slow process. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Which writers do you admire, or which writers do you learn from, or have you learned from?
Well, I remember those certain things that made huge impressions on me, stylistically or whatever, but certainly Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, because that was the first novel I read where you really saw what's possible in literature, the mixing, I don't want to call it magical realism, but the mixing of social realism with alternate realisms, let's just say. And, I certainly liked Faulkner, the stories in the Bible, all of those kinds of stories, even Grimm's fairy tales. I love reading stories because I love that kind of stuff. Toni Morrison's Beloved just blew me away because, again, it showed you what was possible. Scott Momaday, The Way to Rainy Mountain, a seminal text. What a way to conceive of the self when you have you use stories from your culture, your personal experience, and history, just in pieces to kind of to explore what constitutes you as a self. And in his case, of course, an American Indian person, a Kiowa person. But so those are just some of the authors off the top of my head that I've really, really admired. Leslie Marmon Silko is another one who, again, was very imaginative and so forth. So, a lot of the poets, I read the poetry too.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Or can you impart a little advice to those of us who aspire to become writers or just simply enjoy writing?
First thing, read. Okay. Read, because then you see what's possible. And, for me, reading, it kind of stimulates the brain. Mm-hmm. So you not only see what's possible, but you start thinking about what you're doing.
True.
And so that really, if I don't read, I don't have a lot of ideas, it seems. But when I read, I get more ideas. And if I have any complaints about my busy life, it's that I don't have enough time to read as much as I would like.
Right.
So that's kind of a drag. But read, and then just write. It has to be sort of like exercise. You have to go like 45 minutes every day, even if you just sit there in front of a blank piece of paper. I remember a writer once characterized writing as like being the great Acapulco divers. You face you face that blank page, and you got to jump, and you don't know if you're going to hit the rocks, but you got to jump, and you got to go and do it. She also said it's kind of like mountain climbing. It's slow, it's tedious. The view from the top is great, but then you got to go back down and start over again. So,
on the precipice.
Yes, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, you're here in DC for many reasons. Mm-hmm. And one of those reasons is as a tribal chairman, as we learned about, and as well as your leadership role in the Museum of the American Indian. And your work as a tribal chairman is truly history in the making. And you impact the region you live in, and you support education for future generations, as you were saying. Can you talk a little bit about, and I know there are many goals you have as chairman, but could you just talk briefly about immediate goals for you and or your tribe right now?
Well, Yes, I want to expand on all the things we're doing. One of the things that's so important to me are the educational programs. In the last 10 years, we've turned around a 60% dropout rate to 100% graduate from high school.
Oh my goodness.
And so we have after-school programs, and we get federal grants, as tribes will, for small educational things, but we supplement those grants with casino revenues so that all American Indians, regardless of tribes, in Marin and Sonoma counties, in our tribal territories, whether they're federally recognized or not, can use our educational programs. So every fall, for instance, 650 kids get back to school packs and all of that, and counseling and all that sort of thing. The same thing with a lot of our housing programs and things like that. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the fact that our casino business is a business model whereby every 2,400 people who work there all have the Kaiser Gold Cadillac plan. They pay nothing out of their paycheck for full coverage. They get a $10 deductible for aspirin or brain surgery. I probably need the latter. Then they also have a dental, 2,000 non-deductible every year. They have vision. We feed them we team dining room, all with vegetables and stuff from our organic farms. And we have after school, or not programs for their children, but we have literacy programs for them, Spanish to English, English to Spanish classes for them. We have anybody who's working on a green card, we walk them and their families through full citizenship and pay for that. So what you do, it's a model of what you can do with a business and do the right thing. What's really exciting me also is in addition to the 5-acre organic farm we just purchased 40 acres and do an organic farm where we're able basically to feed all of Sonoma County, and we're going to supply all those fancy restaurants in the wine country with vegetables, but more importantly to me, be able to sell organic produce at cost in low-income neighborhoods so that all people in Sonoma County can have the kinds of produce that other people can buy in Whole Foods and places like that. So and then create a model. The other thing I'm really proud of, and I asked other tribes to join us, and they didn't, we gave the University of California in perpetuity $2.5 million a year so that all California Indians of California Indian heritage can go to UC tuition free. Yes.
I'm so impressed.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
these are just, and we gave $20 million to the law school to have a cohort of 5 law students studying Indian law come in every year and endow 2 chairs in Indian law. So Angela Riley, who's on our board, is one of the professors, so she can tell you all about that. But those are the kinds of things. If I've accomplished anything in my life, it's to have reminded my people of our ancestors' values. We're a tribe that suffered a great genocide. At the time of contact, we were about 20,000 people, and today of the 1,537 enrolled members, we all trace our ancestry back to one of 14 survivors, all of whom were women, all of whom were wives or concubines of the early Americans. And so you have the trauma of poverty and all the stuff that goes with that. And for generations, we never had the opportunity to imagine a future, to imagine having any agency in our lives. You're always just worried, how am I going to get food on the table tonight? And so when you have that fear, if you get money, you want to hold on to it, grab it. You don't necessarily want to share. And if I've accomplished anything, I've shown our people and that by sharing with the great opportunity and resources that we've had, that it makes us greater, reminding them that these are in fact the values of our ancestors. And they've gone along. I'm not a dictator. I love to do all of these things, but tribal council has to say okay, and we have elections. And the other thing is, I've been serving as tribal chair for over 30 years, which I think is a record in Indian country. I was interviewed at Stanford a couple weeks ago, and an Indian guy, a writer who was there, asked me if I was mentally ill. So I said, probably. So, because the Indian politics can be very, you're Cherokee, you know. All,
I do.
Yes.
That's for another day.
Yes.
Well, you're up for the challenge,
Yeah.
certainly. And I'm emotional as you talk about all of the accomplishments of your tribe for education, for health, wellness, for all. So you've actually...
I forgot about the Smithsonian. We gave nearly $6 million for educational programs there. Blueprints for public libraries and schools.
Absolutely. And we're
Yeah.
proud to be, with your guidance, telling the history of Native California
Yeah.
and Native Indian California. And you've answered my last question, which was just to talk about why it's important to tell these histories of Native California and California.
Well, you know, thank you for asking. I've always had a chip on my shoulder because growing up, even if it was cowboys and Indians, it was always Plains Indians. And, you know, nobody knew what was going on west of the Rockies.
Right.
And there were more Indians there than anywhere else in the entire New World outside of the present site of Mexico City, which was the Aztec capital, of course, per capita. And all the language families found in the New World are found somewhere in California. For instance, the Pomo language is a Hokan language. That's found in Oaxaca, Mexico. Yeah. So we're all you know, everybody says, well, did you come down the Bering Strait? And I said, I don't know, but I've got my bearing straight. But in any event, it was such a complex culture. And then the horrible genocide as a result of the gold rush that happened, where there were federally financed vigilante groups killing us and getting paid for scalps and hands and all that kind of stuff, totally wiping out tribes. And, you know, the stuff that went on, and nobody knew. The issue is, once again, the Europeans, starting with Buffalo Bill, popularizing so-called American Indian culture, and then, of course, Hollywood picked up on him, they thought that the Plains Indians were the most sophisticated because they had what Europeans valued, which was organized warfare.
Absolutely.
And so they really thought, oh, they're sophisticated, but those California Indians, never mind the thousands upon thousands of them, they just sat around weaving baskets. What did they do? They didn't understand. We were a lot more subtle. We just poisoned you and you dropped dead the next day. So in fact, we figured that physical warfare was the lowest form. Remember, we valued a system where everything had power. So, and I had good songs, but if you stole something from me or hurt me, or if I was a woman and you raped me or did something like that, well, your father, your child would trip and fall the next day or drop dead. And I remember the old people sitting around and somebody would die and they'd go, heart attack or stroke, you know. And the ethnographers all said that our culture was predicated on fear, cultures were predicated on fear and black magic. In fact, they were predicated on profound respect. Imagine so many people speaking so many different languages, getting along with one another in the landscape with virtually very little physical warfare for 10,000 years or more.
Right.
That's, you know, so again, what was most sophisticated?
Exactly.
But again, Europeans can, well, all of us have that terrible tendency to read things in terms of what we value or what we see.
Right.
And they always thought that the Plains Indians, and still Plains Indian motif, I love the fact that we've got stuff going on, you know, on TV, Reservation Dogs, and, you know, Killers of the Flower Moon, but it's all Plains Indians motifs again.
That is true.
So what I did, my tribe did, gave $4 million to Sundance to develop California Indian stories and movies.
Well done. Well done. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I think we're about to turn it over and engage the audience and get you involved. And I just wanted to say thank you again for the journey through Forgetters, which will help us remember. So thank you,
Tanya, well,
Sarris.
thank you, and thank you for caring. And allowing me in this to rip us away from the fun at the museum. I never get to have any fun. Everybody has a big celebration and then, or goes out and does whatever, and I'm going, oh, I have to get up in the morning, or I got to go do something else.
Responsibility, like you've taught us. So we're going to turn it over to the audience
yes.
to ask you more about your busy schedule.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate all the
Thank you for
information.
coming.
Also, just thank you for all the bringing some humanity back to the earth. I mean, the programs, I was getting emotional just listening to the programs, also envious of the healthcare and all that. So thank you very much for that. I feel like I could ask you a million questions about non-book stuff. I mean, Joan Baez, how you managed to make it through life till 11th grade without reading a book, all that stuff is fascinating. But the question that I had about the book, and I don't know if this is my interpretation or if you feel this way too, but I feel like it's a really nice blend of ancient storytelling and modern. It doesn't feel dated.
Thank you so
It feels
much
very
for
modern
asking
to
that.
and
Yeah.
I think that's difficult to do. I feel it doesn't feel cliched, and so I'm just curious if you made a conscious effort to do that, and if so, how?
I'll find out your name and I'll write you to do the back book cover of my next book because I want to follow up with some of these. Because a lot of people, they want to classify it as Indian myth, and it isn't that. And then it's not exactly short stories. It's blending those kinds of things. You have some of those motifs of the ancient landscape and ancient stories, but they're contemporary people that are living those stories. As one of the characters said, all the stories in our lives that we're living have already been told. We just keep reliving them. So it's, again, about these people in new ways that are reliving them. And really, thank you so much for seeing that. There's been a couple scholars that have said, you've almost created a new genre. And, you have to do what's real. And I've done a lot of social realism, Grand Avenue, Watermelon Nights, and all those other things, and myth stuff I've done. But this is something new. This is pretty unique. And I wanted it to be fun and entertaining, but the stories are tight with those booming endings, and you can almost think of Flannery O'Connor or somebody like that who shocks you at the end. Of course, I don't kill people at the end the way she did, but I loved it. She's the greatest Catholic writer that ever existed. She killed everybody for Jesus at the end, but she was a good writer. So thank you so much for that observation. I really don't know how to answer it except that you answered it. You answered your question.
Yeah, I said you just really nailed it. I said it didn't even occur to me after having finished the book, but just reading it, like I said, I felt very sort of like both like back in time, but also very present too. So I feel like that's
timeless, yeah. And when you think about it, if we think about ourselves, we are kind of from the past and making the future. Our lives are short, and all that we have, what'll last longer than us is whatever we do here, our legacy. That's the longest thing that'll last. And that doesn't mean just being a writer or a filmmaker or a tribal leader, whatever, raising your kids, building a fence, doing a garden. That lasts longer than you, right? And so in that sense, we are timeless. At the same time, it's kind of like that old, now I'm talking in cliches, but it's like watching a river. The river's always there, but it's not the same water. Right? So, yeah, thank you. Yes.
Thank you both for this conversation. It was really warm and inspiring. I wanted to ask, I thought a lot about your anecdote of when inspiration strikes you at the gym and you sort of run to the front desk to ask for a pen and paper to write it down. And then I thought about how maybe youthful generations will turn to their smartphones and write it in their notes app. So what are your ideas and strategies for sort of igniting that spark in the youthful generations and helping them out through their writing processes and whatever they want to aspire to?
Well, any way you want to take notes to remember is fine. If you want to use your app, that's fine. You can do that. I mean, if it works for you. What worries me about, and of course I think things could get to a point where we'll have to come back. But what worries me is that as I was teaching creative writing, more and more lately, students' references are TV shows and video games. And those are completely different mediums than the written word. The visual is down, or it's an interactive thing. Remember, you write something, and the story, you've only done 50% of it. The other 50% is the reader. And so what happens if you lose that, I worry. The other thing, especially now that it's taking up as a region, there's a study that just came out a few days ago that 40 to 50% of all college writing now is AI generated. 40 to 50%. And so, and in fact, I have a couple friends who are teaching like freshman English, and they said, oh God, it's more than that at that level, because they're just trying to get through. And so what do you do in that case? And if people aren't going to, if they're going to generate stories and movies from a machine or information that's stored, what does that do for human creativity from the heart and soul? That's really worrisome. You know, there was a movie that's just come out that was totally AI generated, and it was asked to title itself. And you know what it titled itself? The Death of the Artist. Yeah. So it was pretty smart. It knew what it was doing. But yeah, frightening, really frightening. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us.
Yes.
And we'll be stepping over to sign some books. And if you want to, have more conversation with Chairman Sarris. So thank you so much.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you so much. Thank you.